always spiritual seekers since time immemorial who have preferred to minimize and regulate the first two of those three in preference or in deference to achieving self-realization. Because that is actually, as we know, the real mission of the human form of life, which you don't get an opportunity to experience. There are so many other species of life, plants, animals, reptiles, aquatics, and so on, but to get a human form of life is a rare gift. And it's sometimes said in this age of Kali, even though it's a wicked age, the demigods are queuing up to take birth in this Hare Krishna movement because they know in one short span of time they can attain all perfection by the kindness of Mahaprabhu. They can develop love of Godhead and go straight back to the spiritual world. So that's the great dispensation or opulence available to everyone in this age. So it's sometimes said that the whole purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam is that we develop our attraction for Krishna. We may memorize some favourite shlokas to back up what we're saying in class or to impress someone who's maybe hard to convince, or to pass a Bhakti Shastri test. But the real essence of Srimad Bhagavatam, studying Srimad Bhagavatam throughout our lives, is to develop love for Krishna, to develop profound attraction to Krishna. And it's also said that if you'd like to know some of the choicest verses in the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, and there's 18,000 of them, then study Caitanya Caritamrita. Because Srila Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, he mentions hundreds of them throughout the course of this great literature. And our acharyas like Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who have written commentaries, and other acharyas, they also add many other famous verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So they are working together to benefit us spiritually by studying these great literatures and developing our love for Krishna. So this is an extraordinary pastime, the conversion, and I think Prabhupada mentioned that word. If I could convert, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says, even one person into a pure devotee, he would consider his mission fulfilled. So this particular pastime of Mahaprabhu, he is in Varanasi. Chandrasekhar Acharya and Tapan Mishra Prabhus are looking after the Lord very nicely. He spends 2 months of the rainy season. It's actually around about this time, more than 500 years ago, that Mahaprabhu was in Varanasi in the midst of the rainy season. Srila Sanatana Goswami comes to join him there. Mahaprabhu, for his own, to set the example, he doesn't immediately associate with Prakashananda Saraswati and his 40,000 disciples. He avoids them. But it's said there is one particular day in the middle of the 4 months of Chaturmasya, a very auspicious day, where sannyasis, if they are observing Chaturmasya, allowing their hair and beards to grow and their fingernails and so on, and eating very frugally, on this particular auspicious day they can actually take a trip to the barbers and get a haircut and shave their beards, because beards get a bit itchy after a couple of months. So that's voluntary, but anyway, it would appear that on this particular occasion Mahaprabhu took the opportunity to give his mercy to Prakashananda Saraswati. And ultimately, because he is God, it's very easy pastime for him to convert such what we would refer to as hardcore Mayavadis. Because he is God and he's all powerful. There's no meaning to the word omnipotent if God can't do something. I think a clever person thought, they asked for a Prabhupada one time, could Krishna create a stone that's even too heavy for him to lift? And Prabhupada said, oh yes, and then he'll lift it. So Mahaprabhu was instructing us here, be cautious in approaching those who are actually very jealous of Krishna. They give some lip service, yes, we believe in God. They even address one another. Om Namo Narayanaya. Obeisances to you, Narayan. That misconception that they are, that everyone's God. Vaishnavas, on the other hand, we prefer to address one another, Hare Krishna, or Krishna Mati Ashtu. May your consciousness be filled up with thoughts of Krishna. So, on this particular occasion, of course, Mahaprabhu was able to make this great conversion very easily due to his being the all-attractive Supreme Lord. Akbaramas chamunaya nigranta upirukrame kubancha hotin kim bhaktin itam bhuta guno hari. Even personalities who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge, even they become attracted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead due to the Lord possessing all attractive qualities. So if some of us have come to Krishna Bhakti via impersonalism in one shape or form or another, then we're in good company, because the four Kumaras, Shukadeva Goswami, and here Prakashananda Saraswati and all his followers, they have come to the realization that this teaching of Shankaracharya, which had its purpose, no doubt, is not ultimately fulfilling. They're not experiencing complete satisfaction. Maybe some understanding that they're eternal. They have some knowledge, no doubt. But there's very little ananda. There are many verses in Srimad Bhagavatam that describe or draw a comparison between a tiny puddle of water and the vast ocean. They're both water, bodies of water, but there's no comparison. So Rupa Goswami, the first book that he wrote is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and Sindhu means ocean. So the nectar of the ocean of devotion. Because the bliss we are looking for is found in connecting with the unlimited ocean of bliss, Lord Sri Krishna. So there have been many conversions, if you like, in the history of the world. There was, and because this Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya is relatively new in comparison to some of the other more orthodox and established Vaishnava Sampradayas, like the Sri Sampradaya, in which the great Acharya Ramanuja appeared, and also other Vaishnava Sampradayas are there, emanating from the four Kumaras. Of course, we are members of the Brahma Sampradaya, in which the great Madhva Acharya appeared. And other great stalwart acharyas have appeared. The Sampradaya appearing from Lord Shiva. And of course, the Lakshmi Sampradaya is where Ramanuja Acharya appeared. Vishnu Swami and Bhaka Acharya, they were other great acharyas in other Vaishnava Sampradayas. And they are somewhat older. In the year 2017, one weekend here at New Govardhana, we couldn't help but notice there were many Vaishnavas, but they weren't Gaudiya Vaishnavas. They were from the Sri Sampradaya, and they came here on a Saturday morning. We met many of them, and then again on the Sunday feast they were here. And I couldn't help but ask, I was curious, oh, Hare Krishna, nice that you've come. And they enlightened me to the fact that it was the 1000th appearance of Sri Parabrahmanaja Acharya. He appeared in the year 1017, so that was delightful. And of course there were massive celebrations all over the world where the Sri Sampradaya have large temples in many big cities of the world, but not so much here on the Gold Coast or here. So they came. They knew about New Govardhana, so they came here. It's a Vishnu temple. Many of them were dressed very elegantly in their dhotis with big Ramanuja tilak, and the ladies were dressed very elegantly in this traditional South Indian style saris. And Ramanuja Acharya's appearance was being celebrated. In India, I think many of our ISKCON temples leaders were invited to many of the big programs, especially in South India, but in Vrindavan and other places also, so there's mutual regard and respect there. So there was another interesting event which happened in the history of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and that was when a great Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharya appeared in the year 1720. And his parents named him Baladev. Later on, he would receive the honorific title Vijabhushana, which means one who's decorated with all knowledge. So, Baladev Vijabhushana, he appeared in Orissa, in a family of agriculturalists, and his father was a Vaishnava and observed in his son many divine signs and his natural devotion to Krishna. So even though he wasn't a rich man, his father ensured that his son got a thorough education in Sanskrit and Nyaya, logic, and Vedanta, the Puranas, and all branches of Vedic knowledge. And he was well known as a great scholar even in his childhood. Not much is known about his early life because it's a tradition amongst Vaishnavas, especially our Gaudiya Vaishnavas. They're very humble, and even they go on to become great authors and write many, many books and many commentaries on other bhakti shastras. They generally don't say much about themselves. You have that example there when Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami compiled the Hari Bhakti Vilas. It was a collaboration. But Gopal Bhatta Goswami asked Srila Sanatana Goswami, please don't mention me in this book. So Sanatana Goswami honors that request. He only mentions Gopal Bhatta Goswami obliquely by suggesting that he was helped by one South Indian Brahmana. And similarly, in Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Caitanya Caritamrita, when some of the Goswamis heard that he was writing this great book, they asked him, please don't mention me in your book. I think perhaps Raghunath Bhatta Goswami and perhaps Gopal Bhatta Goswami may have mentioned it. So, of course, for that reason, we don't know very much about their early life. And similarly it is the case with Baladev Vijabhushana, it does indicate that he accepted the sannyas order of life at a very young age. He travelled and studied in Udupi. He may have had some connection with the Madhva Sampradaya. In fact, he does mention that himself, and the little that he says about himself, it would appear that he may have taken sannyas in that line. And he travelled all over India, as many saintly persons have traditionally done. He visited all holy places, the length and breadth of India, and then after many years he returned to Orissa, and he was residing for some time in Jagannath Puri. And it was there that he met one disciple of the great Rasikanandana Prabhu, who was coming in the line of Srila Shyamananda Prabhu in the Gaudiya Sampradaya. And this person, his name was Radha Damodar Goswami. And he was a vastly learned scholar and a very elevated follower of Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So they became friends, and they actually became more than friends in that Baladeva Jigusana became convinced of the superlativeness of the teachings of Mahaprabhu and the Goswamis, and he actually took initiation from Radha Damodar Goswami, became his initiated disciple. And at some point thereafter, he moved to Vrindavan, where he resided for the rest of his life. And it was in Vrindavan that he took shelter of the great Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who became his student. And one day, a messenger arrived at the ashram of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And that messenger had come from the king of Jaipur, who had a big problem. The king of Jaipur was a Gaudiya Vaishnava, but in Jaipur or nearby there was a sect of the Ramanuja Sampradaya known as the Ramanandis, and they were Brahmanas. They'd been there a long time. And they had some issues with the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, who were doing all the deity worship of Rupa Goswami's much loved Radha Govinda deities. Their main issue, or one of their issues, was that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas are actually not authorized. The whole Sampradaya isn't authorized because the Gaudiyas do not have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. All the other Vaishnavacharyas have written commentaries on Vedanta Sutra. So in that way, they are not authorized, and we should take over the seva of the deities. So this was a big problem for the king. So he sent a message to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur: you have to come here in person and sort this out, so to speak, rectify this dilemma. The problem was that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was very old, and would not have been possible for him to make the arduous journey. So instead he sent Baladeva Jigusana and one other very learned disciple. And of course, this all ties together with Prakashananda Saraswati and the followers of Shankaracharya in Benares, in the sense that they say the main business of aspiring transcendentalists is just to study Vedanta Sutra. But what happened was when Baladev arrived there, an august assembly of all the Ramanandi Pandits was in the presence of the king, was assembled, and they put forward their arguments, and Baladev put forward counter-arguments. And essentially there was a stalemate. Baladev did explain the reason that the Gaudiya Sampradaya doesn't have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, because Mahaprabhu never considered it very important. He said that the natural commentary by the same author on Vedanta Sutra is Srimad Bhagavatam. So for this reason, and Mahaprabhu himself, being the Supreme Lord, could have very easily compiled a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, or he could have empowered someone like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was a great Vedantist and teaching Vedanta Sutra prior to his conversion, to Krishna Bhakti, and so many other great scholars like Rupa and Sanatan were there, but Mahaprabhu didn't consider it important enough. He said, we already have a natural commentary by the same author, Srimad Bhagavatam, so let's just study that. And he held the Bhagavatam up aloof as the topmost. And in fact, there is a nice verse in Srimad Bhagavatam itself, which is Pasyanam Brahma Sutranam. It's the natural commentary. No need for a separate commentary. And Prabhupada, on one occasion when he was speaking about Baladevi Vijayabhusana, and it's very much worth noting that Prabhupada dedicated his Bhagavad Gita commentary, called Bhagavad Gita as it is, to Srila Baladev Vijayabhusana, who he said so wonderfully presented Vedanta Sutra, a commentary on Vedanta Sutra in his Sri Govinda Bhasya. So Prabhupada told the story on one occasion of a famous poet and playwright in Bengal known as Mr. Roy. And Mr. Roy wrote one of many books and plays, and this particular book was called Shah Jahan. And some of us who know a little Indian history or have been to Agra and seen the Taj Mahal, we will know that Shah Jahan was the former Mughal emperor of North India who created what is considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Taj Mahal. It's a mausoleum actually. His wife is buried there, I think. But it's considered one of the great symbols of love, because Shah Jahan was devastated when his wonderful wife passed away at a relatively young age. She'd already given birth to a number of children. There were 3 sons of Shah Jahan. The 3rd son, Prabhupada says, turned out very crooked. His name was Aurangzeb. And he was very ambitious, to the point where he killed his 2 older brothers and imprisoned his father in the Agra fort for the rest of his life. And he usurped the throne. He became the next emperor. So this, after reading the book, Mr. Roy's friend, who was a literary man, he commented, actually, I think you should have called your book Aurangzeb, because it appears that he's the real main character in the book. But then Mr. Roy defeated that notion, gave him very wonderful examples of why, no, actually Shah Jahan is the real main character, the real hero of the story. Sometimes stories are full of tragedy, but they're very good stories. We could comment on the pastime of Lord Ramachandra, the Supreme Lord, because Lord Ramachandra had to experience, as we all know, there are so many tragedies, being exiled to the forest on the eve of his coronation, having his consort abducted by the Rakshasa, Ravana, and having to fight a whole battle to get her back and so on. Mayada Purushottama is a wonderful name of Lord Ramachandra. It means one whose conduct or character is unimpeachable. Lord Ram's character no one could fault. And as we know, formerly kings would go out dressed in disguise sometimes to hear what the common people were saying about them. I don't know if kings do that anymore, or politicians, but so in this way, Prabhupada uses this delightful example to illustrate how Srila Vyasdev, he is the author of both books. Though it's explained by Jiva Goswami that Srimad Bhagavatam is actually Shruti or Smriti. It's original Vedas. And in fact, he goes to lengths to say that all the Shruti, all the Puranas, but especially Srimad Bhagavatam is eternal, but Vyasadeva, Vyasa meaning compiler or editor, he took the trouble to write it down for our benefit on the order of Narad, his spiritual master, that you're feeling dissatisfied because you haven't fully, thoroughly glorified Krishna, his name, fame, form, entourage, pastimes, etc. So, and that was after Vyasa had, in fact, compiled all of the other Vedic literatures, including Vedanta Sutra, which is for philosophers and is described as the condensed essence of all the 108 principal Upanishads. So, even with these very strong arguments, the Ramanandis of Golta were saying, when Baladev admitted, no, there isn't a commentary, so they got a little excited during the debate and said, see, you don't have a commentary. And then Baladev said, well, I'll produce one. So they gave him 18 days to write a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. So he wondered what he'd done. So he went home, and that night, or he went back to his accommodations, that night he had a dream. And the deity, Lord Govinda, in Jaipur, said to him in a dream, you just write, I'll dictate. We'll do this. So the next morning, when Baladev arose, he was very excited, and he immediately started to write, and Lord Govinda dictated to him. He went to the Lord's temple, he begged his permission, and within a comparatively short time, he compiled this wonderful Bhasya, commentary, Govinda Bhasya. And again, the king called for all the pundits, and he presented his commentary, and they were all silenced. More than that, they were actually shocked, speechless, after reading this wonderful commentary from the Gaudiya Vaishnava side. And actually, they all wanted to become disciples of Baladev Vijayabhusana, but he politely declined. He said, no, that would be offensive on my part. Your sampradaya is one of the great Vaishnava sampradayas. You are holding service to the Lord as the highest ideal, bhakti. So he politely declined. He said, no, that would be a great aparad on my part. So this was ultimately, it was reconciled very nicely. So the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya does, in fact, now have, thanks to Baladev Vijayabhusana, a wonderful commentary. Anyone is interested to read it, on Vedanta Sutra. And of course, Prabhupada would quote sometimes, at least the first two stanzas and others as well, from Vedanta Sutra, like Tato Brahma Jignasa. Now that we've achieved this rare human form of life, now is the time to inquire into the nature of the absolute truth. And the very next aphorism, Janma Yasya Yataha. The absolute truth is He from which everything emanates. So we are all also Vedantists. Our Vaishnava Acharyas reject the notion that only the followers of Shankaracharya are. They would like to say that they have a monopoly on Vedanta, but that is not actually the case. The Vaishnava Acharyas have all written, and we have the natural commentary on Vedanta, and that of course is Srimad Bhagavatam. I just wanted to share another story which also ties in. Some of us will remember Ramai Maharaj, our dear Brigupati Prabhu. Krishna Kirtan was there in Sydney. He served as the Vice President of our Sydney Temple and as the President of New Vaishana for a short while before heading back to America. But Prabhupada told me once, he shared the story of how he joined. And every devotee, of course, has a delightful story of how they took up the practice of bhakti yoga somewhere or other in the world. And Prabhu, as we affectionately used to refer to him, he told me he was living in New Jersey, one of the suburbs just outside of New York City. He never used to go into the city too much, except when he really had to do a little bit of shopping and to visit the Theosophical Society. And Prabhupada actually used to leave some of his Back to Godhead magazines at the Theosophical Society, I think in Delhi and other places, maybe in America. And last century, and possibly some even today, Theosophical Society, some of us used to visit their reading rooms and their libraries, and you could borrow books on all different esoteric and especially Indian spiritual philosophy. So Prabhupada was visiting New York one day, and he'd been alerted, he'd had a call that a book he really wanted to borrow was available from their library. You could come and collect it. And it was the book Sariraka of Sripad Shankaracharya, his Mayavad commentary on Vedanta Sutra. So Prabhu was very excited, went into the city, did what he had to do, was heading home with the copy of Sariraka in his bag, and he was stopped by a very attractive young woman. She was selling books on the footpath. One of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, 1973. And the only book she had for sale was Teachings of Lord Caitanya. So Prabhupada got these two books, he headed home, and he looked at them both and he was really excited. But the Teachings of Lord Caitanya was infinitely more attractive than the dusty old copy of Sariraka Bhasya. So he started reading that first, and he read till 11 o'clock that night. And it was so enthralling, and there were beautiful paintings in there as well, front and cover, beautiful. A photograph of Srila Prabhupada holding a flower, yellow champak flower, I think somewhere in India. So Prabhu, and the next morning he kept reading, he read the whole, and there was a stamp inside the book, Sunday Feast Invitation. We used to do that in the old days, right, Maharaj? All the books we got. It was kind of fun. And all the back, we just have a stamp pad and a stamp with the temple address. We used to do this in Christchurch. And an invitation to the Sunday feast. And we did every piece of literature, we just stamp. Because we never knew where they'd go. But anyway, next Sunday, Prabhu went to the temple. And he became a devotee very quickly. He just fell in love with Krishna consciousness. He never read the Sariraka Bhasya. He took it back to the Theosophical Society. He said, look, there you go. And Prabhu said that the reason he dedicated himself to book distribution, and I think he received an award, Maharaj, you may have even been there in Mayapur, it's quite a few years ago, 40 years of solid, regular distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. He's getting a bit old now, like most of us, but and he said the reason he dedicated himself to book distribution, he was so grateful that he'd become a devotee because he'd met a devotee and gotten a copy of one of Prabhupada's books. He could have, and that was divine arrangement, call it what we will. Krishna works in wonderful ways when the jiva is ready to engage in devotional service. There's a wonderful, Krishna has unlimited energies, we know, very easy for Mahaprabhu to convert Prakashananda Saraswati. Probably you and I couldn't do that, but he's God, he could do it very easily. One of Krishna's many energies, Palasha Shakti Vividhaya Spriyate, is really fascinating. It's known as his Satya Sankalpa Shakti. Satya means truth, sankalpa means desire or determination. We could say Srila Prabhupada's sankalpa was his fierce determination to share Mahaprabhu's teachings with people outside the boundaries of India, as he'd been ordered to do, and if he ever got money, print books. So that was Prabhupada's determination, his desire. And with great endeavour and struggles, he was able to achieve that very, very wonderfully. So Bhrigupati thought that was his meditation for many, many years. So grateful, he had a grateful heart. Krishna can do Satya Sankalpa Shakti. Krishna merely has to think of doing something and it happens. The Lord's mere desire to enjoy a particular pastime or to achieve a particular outcome, and it happens. But for his devotees, there may be struggles, and of course that makes the final success even more relishable. When you've struggled very hard to achieve something, material or spiritual, when you finally achieve it after a great struggle, then it's even more relishable. And of course Prabhupada's glory is that he did. He wasn't deterred. Even there were setbacks and obstacles and challenges. Prabhupada just pushed on relentlessly. So that makes his achievements even more wonderful. So I better stop here. If anyone has any questions or comments, please. All right, there's no questions. I think everyone's.
Very nice class.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thanks for sitting through it. I would have much rather heard you, but I think unless Maharaj would like to add a comment or two, Krishna Kirtan's organising Sri microphone.
You mentioned that Bhrigupati Prabhu, pretty much started by that. There's one thing about him, because the book distributed, is also made on reading Prabhupada's books.
Yes.
So every time you see him, he's in the corner somewhere with a book, head in the book, what call you out and say, listen to this, listen to that. I had the great fortune, he made me devotee, and also was my Bhakta leader, and we travelled all together, so very, very wonderful, very soul. Miss him very much, because he's all the way over in LA.
Yeah.
He's such a sweet, he's so loyal to Prabhupada, to the authorities in ISKCON, that even though in his heart he wanted to distribute books, in the 80s there was the order to go into paraphernalia, and he did that. And it wasn't really what he wanted to do, but he would do it day in, day out. He'd sell candles and paintings or whatever. In his heart he wanted to distribute books. Wonderful association.
Yeah, wonderful person.
He's still there residing. I just got a letter from him yesterday.
Oh, well, there you go.
It was about another man, an executive committee manager. He's doing well, and he's over there in LA, going out for distribution quite often. He's like all these young guys are going out, and he's like always, distributes the most books. And he's, I think he's like in his 70s, so, and he still goes out. And he told me in my book that, I said, well, how long do you think? He said, well, I'll just go until I drop. When I can't physically do it anymore, that's not so. He's so dedicated, he's got such a taste for it. Wonderful devotee.
Yeah, wonderful devotee, yeah. I have fond memories. We used to distribute books some days downtown Sydney, Maharaj, late 70s. It was really hard. It was really hard, as you know. And we'd be there on those busy intersections downtown Sydney. And Bhrigu had a technique that worked really well for him. He would only stop men because obviously ladies would get pretty nervous if you tried to do this. But he would see a gentleman coming along the street, and as he was nearing or just walking past, Brigger would put his hand out, and he'd say, "Hi, I'm Brigger from New York." And he'd grab the man's hand, and he wouldn't let it go, and he'd be shaking hands. And with the other hand, he'd pull the book out of his book bag, big books we were distributing, and give it to the man, and still holding onto his hand and still shaking. And because everyone who's ever done book distribution knows, people are going about their business, and you're a perfect stranger, and you're trying to befriend that person and convince them to buy this book in a matter of seconds, trying to create a bubble around them. So that was his technique, Brigger, and it worked pretty well. Yeah, "Hi, I'm Brigger from New York," and some, "Oh, fantastic! I'm so and so from Coonabarabran." But yeah, delightful devotee. So, and yeah, I just always loved, and I was so grateful when he shared that way of how he joined Prabhupada. All right, His Grace Prabhu Ki. Shri Caitanya Charitamrita Ki.